Jon Snow stood at the edge of the world, boots buried deep in the snowdrifts beyond the battered walls of Winterfell, his black cloak snapping in the teeth of the wind. His mind was a blizzard, a relentless churn of memory, regret, and anticipation. Ghost padded beside him, white as the wind itself, red eyes catching every flicker of movement on the darkening plain. Above, the sky was heavy with the threat of snow. The clouds curdled and bruised. But Jon's thoughts were far beyond the coming storm. He remembered dragonfire lighting the sky above the long lake, remembered the shriek of Viserion falling, and the blue witch fire that stole the beast's life away. Yet he remembered too the sensation that had flashed through him when the dragon's eye met his own, even as it died. A strange recognition, as if something in Viserion's soul had reached for him. Since that day, Jon had not been able to rid himself of the certainty that something unfinished clung to him, that the world waited, breath held, for a choice that was his alone to make. And now, as news of the Night King's approach swept through the north like a freezing wind, Jon found himself thinking of Viserion more and more. Not as a dead thing, not as a weapon for the enemy, but as something alive and lost, longing for its place in the living world. Rhaegal, too, had grown restive, pacing the icy courtyards, craning his long neck toward the north, as if he too felt his brother's absence as a wound. The council had ended hours ago. Daenerys, regal, indomitable, her silver hair a banner in the firelight, had been a storm of command and passion, her voice filling the hall as she outlined their defenses. Jon had stood at her side, Sansa cool and careful on his other, Arya silent and sharp as an unsheathed blade in the shadows. They listened, argued, planned, but none of them spoke of the real terror, the undead dragon that would soon be upon them. Fire turned to ice, death given wings. That night, unable to sleep, Jon went to the Godswood. The heart tree waited, gnarled and bleeding red, and Jon knelt before it, ghost at his back, snow swirling in silent drifts. "If you have any mercy, old gods, new gods, hear me," Jon whispered. "Give me the strength to do what must be done." Something shifted in the darkness, a ripple of power so cold it burned. Ghost's hackles rose, and from the corner of his eye Jon saw a shimmer, something like moonlight on a frozen pond, something that moved but did not belong. He rose, heart hammering, sword at his side, and followed the feeling out of the Godswood, through the silent castle, beyond the walls. He was halfway to the edge of the long barrow field when he saw it, a flicker of gold and green, massive wings beating against the wind. Rhaegal, dot. The dragon landed before him with a thunderous crash, eyes like coals, breath smoking in the frigid air. For a moment Jon hesitated, then placed a gloved hand on Rhaegal's warm scales. "You feel it too," he murmured. "He's out there." Rhaegal lowered his head. Jon swung himself up, the movement as familiar as mounting a horse, and the dragon leapt skyward. Winterfell vanished beneath him, a toy fortress battered by time. The world spread out, white and endless. The lights of the castle swallowed by darkness. They flew north, further than Jon had ever dared. Hours passed, or perhaps only moments. The sensation of riding a dragon was timeless, dreamlike. Each beat of Rhaegal's wings, a surge of power that carried Jon further from everything he'd known. The cold grew fierce, biting through cloak and skin, but Jon pressed on, urging Rhaegal higher, faster, following the tug in his soul. There, on the edge of the world, beneath the shattered moon and the flickering aurora, Jon saw it. Viserion, broken and magnificent, wings battered, but still powerful, eyes flickering between blue and gold, as if trapped between two worlds. The Night King stood upon the dragon's back, pale and implacable, his gaze meeting Jon's across the void of night. Jon's breath caught. He felt Rhaegal tremble beneath him, a deep, angry growl rumbling through the dragon's bones. Yet Viserion did not attack. The dead dragon hovered, uncertain, a prisoner in its own skin. The Night King raised a hand. The battle was brief, savage, silent as a nightmare. Rhaegal screamed, fire exploding from his jaws, golden against the blue night. Viserion twisted in the air, a shriek of agony bursting from his ruined throat, white fire splintering across the sky. Jon clung to Rhaegal's back, sword in hand, heart beating like a war drum. He remembered then the stories old Nan had told, of the first men who spoke to beasts, who tamed direwolves and krakens, who ruled not by force but by kinship. He remembered Ghost's eyes in the dark, loyal and wild. And he remembered the feeling, the connection, he'd felt with Viserion in that final moment before death. Jon closed his eyes, opening himself to the world, the wind, the cold, the flame that lived inside him. "Viserion," he whispered, not aloud but in the language of the soul. "Come back." The world shuddered. Viserion screamed, a sound of pure anguish. The Night King's eyes flared. For a moment Jon felt the enemies were pressing down on him, cold and pitiless, and he almost faltered. But then something deep inside him answered, a fire older than words, a song of ice and fire. He felt it snap. The Night King's control broke. Viserion staggered in the air, wings flailing, eyes rolling. Rhaegal darted in, jaws snapping, claws raking at the undead dragon's side. The Night King tumbled from his perch, falling into the abyss below, his scream lost in the howl of the wind. For a moment, the world was still. Then Viserion turned his head, gold returning to his eyes, smoke curling from his nostrils. He regarded Jon with something like gratitude, or perhaps hope. Rhaegal hovered beside him, and for the first time, the two dragons touched noses, brothers reunited. Jon guided Rhaegal down, landing on the icy plain. Viserion circled, then settled beside them, wings folded, tail curled protectively. The snow fell thicker, muting the world, but Jon felt something shift, some ancient magic answering his call. He slid from Rhaegal's back, moving carefully, boots crunching in the snow, until he stood before the undead dragon. He reached out, not knowing what he expected, and placed his hand against Viserion's snout. The flesh was cold, too cold, but not dead. Not anymore. The dragon's eyes flickered. Jon saw, in that moment, the pain and confusion, the longing to belong again to the living world. "I'm here," Jon whispered. "You're not alone." He did not know how long he stood there, hand pressed to the beast's scales, feeling the slow, uncertain return of life. The wind howled. The snow gathered. But for the first time since he'd come back from death, Jon felt truly alive. They returned to Winterfell at dawn, two dragons soaring over the frozen fields. Jon atop Rhaegal, Viserion flying in uneasy tandem. The watchmen on the walls stared in terror and awe, bells ringing, shouts echoing through the battered gates. Jon landed first, sliding from Rhaegal's back as the soldiers closed ranks around him. Daenerys was there, her face a storm of fury and fear. "Jon," she cried, pushing through the ranks. "What have you done?" "What?" But her words died as she saw Viserion land, battered and scorched, wings mantled in the weak morning sun. The dead dragon bowed his head, blue fire flickering in his throat. But his eyes were gold. Jon stepped forward, hands raised. "He's free, Daenerys. He's with us." She stared, tears standing in her violet eyes. "How?" "I don't know," Jon said softly. "But he came back to me, to us." A silence stretched between them, the soldiers and lords of the north watching, uncertain. Then Arya stepped forward, eyes narrowed, lips curled in a wolf's smile. "You tamed a dead dragon, Jon." She said, "Is there anything you can't do?" Sansa's voice was careful, measured. "Does he remember what he was?" "I think so," Jon said. "He's wounded, but he's not lost." Bran watched from his chair, eyes distant, as if seeing something far beyond the walls of Winterfell. "There are bonds in this world older than death," he murmured. "Blood, fire, will," the lords of the north murmured among themselves, fear mingling with awe. Tormund Giantsbane grinned, clapping Jon on the back. If you start sprouting scales, Snow, we'll know you've gone too far. Winterfell became a fortress alive with power. 2 dragons circled above, Rhaegal and Viserion, their presence a promise and a warning to any who would challenge the North. Jon and Daenerys stood together on the battlements, watching as the last of the wildlings and northern banners arrived, the armies of men gathering to face the coming storm. Daenerys' rage had cooled to awe, and something deeper, a fear she could not voice. He's still touched by death, Jon. He's not like the others. Then, I know, Jon said, resting his hand on hers. But he's with us. That has to mean something. She studied him, eyes searching. How did you do it? He shook his head. I don't know. I felt something, like he was reaching for me. I just answered. She closed her eyes, trembling. He was my child. I felt him die. But now, she broke off, tears spilling down her cheeks. Thank you. Jon pulled her close, the 2 of them standing together against the world. Below, the armies of men drilled, axes and swords flashing in the morning light. Above, the dragons soared, their shadows falling across the snow. The Night King did not wait long. On the 3rd night, after Viserion's return, the dead came, endless, silent, their eyes burning blue. They swept across the fields like a tide. The living met them at the trenches, fire roaring, arrows falling in black clouds. Jon rode Rhaegal into the storm, sword drawn, fire blazing. Viserion came beside him, a ghostly terror of gold and blue, his breath a stream of cold flame that shattered the ranks of the dead. The 2 dragons fought as one, circling and striking, their bond as deep and fierce as blood. The battle was chaos, a blur of fire and ice, steel and claw. The Night King appeared, silent as ever, atop a pale horse, his army pressing forward. Jon saw him and Dove, Rhaegal roaring, Viserion circling. It was not enough to kill the Night King, Jon knew. He had to end the magic that bound the dead. He fought his way through the ranks, ghost at his side, sword flashing. He found the Night King on the field of corpses, surrounded by his lieutenants. They clashed, steel on ice, fire on shadow. Jon was wounded, blood soaking his cloak, but he pressed on. In the end, it was not dragonfire or sword that ended the Night King. It was Jon's will, his refusal to surrender, his love for the living and the lost. He drove Longclaw through the Night King's heart, and the world shuddered. The dead fell, the dragons roared. After, Winterfell was quiet. The bodies were burned, the wounded tended. The snow fell in silence, covering the scars of war. Jon stood atop the battlements, watching the dragons circle. Daenerys joined him, her hand slipping into his. You saved us, she said. We saved each other, Jon replied. Below, Viserion landed beside Rhaegal, the 2 brothers at peace at last. The war was not over. The Game of Thrones would continue, men and women vying for power in a broken world. But for a moment, there was peace. For a moment, Jon Snow, rider of dragons, was content. He had claimed his destiny. He had brought the lost home. And in the silence that followed, he knew that whatever storms lay ahead, he would face them not alone, but as the leader of a dragon duo, the first in 1,000 years to walk the world as both wolf and fire, the hope of the living against the night. Ka. Snow fell in thick curtains, blanketing the battlements and the dead alike, smoothing the wounds carved by battle into the white hush of the aftermath. Smoke still drifted from the pyres outside Winterfell's gates, twisting through the dawn, but within the castle walls, life crept hesitantly forward. The 2 dragons, one gold-green and radiant, the other pale and battered but unmistakably alive, kept watch above, shadows on the snow, reminders of terror and hope in equal measure. Jon Snow woke before the sun, stiff and aching, his wounds stitched and raw beneath the bandages. Ghost was asleep beside his bed, red eyes finally at peace. And Jon felt the wolf's slow, contented breath through the ragged edge of the bond that had survived so much. The fight with the Night King lingered in Jon's body, bruises blooming purple along his ribs. the memory of cold steel scraping bone. Yet it was not pain that woke him, but an unease, an unfinished feeling, as if something yet hung in the frozen air. An unspoken word, a prophecy, unresolved. He dressed quietly, every movement careful, and walked the corridors he had known since boyhood. Winterfell was alive in a way it hadn't been since before Ned's fall. Wildlings and Northmen mingling in the great hall. Dothraki voices rising in the yard, the unsullied forming precise, silent ranks. The banners of House Stark and House Targaryen snapped together above the gate. Once, Jon would have marveled at the sight. Now he could only wonder how long such fragile unity could last. With the dead gone and old hatreds creeping back into men's hearts. He found Daenerys on the battlements, her hair unbound, silver, and tangled in the cold wind. She wore no crown. She had not worn it since the battle, but there was no mistaking the authority in her stance. She watched the dragons, who circled above the fields beyond the castle, their movements slow and wary, as if reacquainting themselves with the sky and each other. "Couldn't sleep," Jon said softly, stopping a respectful distance away. She glanced at him, her face pale, the deep shadows beneath her eyes betraying exhaustion. "I keep expecting to wake and find it all undone. That Viserion is gone again, that the dead are marching. Dreams and memories blur together in war." He leaned on the icy stone beside her. "I know the feeling. Sometimes I wonder if I ever truly left the wall, or if all this—" He gestured to the dragons, the battered castle, the strange new banners, "is just a dream I'm having on some wind-blown night in the north." She smiled, but her lips trembled. "If this is a dream, I hope neither of us wakes." She hesitated, watching the dragons. "He's different, Jon. Viserion. He lingers at the edge of things. I call to him, but he comes only for you." Jon didn't answer for a long while. "Death changes everything. But I think he remembers you in some way. He remembers love. It's just—" He struggled to find words, looking at the place where Viserion glided through the breaking dawn. Pale and spectral but beautiful. "He's come back through darkness. Maybe he's searching for himself, as much as for us." Daenerys gripped his arm. "Promise me he will not be used against me." Jon turned to her, meeting her haunted gaze. "You have my word. I would never let harm come to you, Daenerys. Or to your dragons." Something softened in her face, and she turned back to the fields. "I want to believe you, Jon. I do." A distant cry, a deep, rolling thunder, echoed across the sky. Rhaegal and Viserion swooped lower, circling the godswood. Below, the gates opened, and a line of ragged, half-starved figures staggered in from the night, survivors of the outlying villages, drawn to the promise of warmth and safety. Arya and Brienne moved among them, weapons lowered, words measured. Jon watched them, pride and sorrow mingling in his chest. "What happens now?" Daenerys asked. Jon thought of Sansa, already meeting with the northern lords, and Tyrion hunched over his maps, calculating the cost of victory. "We rebuild," Jon said. "We tend the wounded, bury the dead. Try to hold the north together if we can." She shook her head. "The north is only the beginning. Cersei still sits the Iron Throne. The realm is broken. If we turn inward now, all this," she swept a hand to the horizon, "will be for nothing." He could hear the passion in her voice, the hunger for justice, for retribution. "I know. But the North will not follow you blindly. They fought and bled for their own. You'll need their trust." Her face set like marble. "I mean to earn it, Jon, whatever it takes." He nodded, knowing there would be hard choices ahead, knowing also that their alliance, however strong on the field of battle, was forged of fragile things. Love, loyalty, ambition. Anyone could be tested and found wanting. "Then we face it together." She turned to him then, her gaze fierce and bright, and for a moment Jon saw not the Dragon Queen, but the woman he had come to love. Determined, wounded, yet filled with impossible hope. She pressed a gloved hand to his cheek, then turned away, vanishing down the stone stairs, leaving Jon alone with the wind. Days passed. The dead were burned, the wounded tended. Ravens brought tidings from the south. Cersei had fortified King's Landing. The Golden Company marching beneath Lannister banners, Euron Greyjoy's fleet prowling the narrow sea. The lords of the north gathered in Winterfell's great hall, each with his own demands, his own scars from the war. Tensions simmered. The wildlings chafed at orders from Stark men. Glover and Manderly eyed Daenerys Dothraki with suspicion. Even the old Stark bannermen whispered that the dragons were a harbinger of doom. Jon did what he had always done: listened, mediated, bore the weight of other men's fears. Yet he felt a distance growing, as if the very thing that had saved them now set him apart. The North remembered the cold, remembered the ancient stories of monsters that wore the faces of men. They watched Viserion circle the skies, and some prayed. Others sharpened their swords. Arya found him one night on the ramparts, where he stared into the darkness, hand wrapped tight around the hilt of Longclaw. "They're scared," she said, joining him, her boots making no sound on the stone. "They have reason to be," Jon answered. "The world is changing. Dragons, armies, dead men that don't stay dead. I can hardly blame them for fearing what they don't understand." Arya studied him, head tilted. "And you? Do you fear what you've become?" He didn't answer right away. "I came back different. I feel it. The world is heavier. There are days I wake and wonder if I truly belong anywhere. Even among my own kin, I am a stranger. Even among the dragons, I am something else." She bumped her shoulder against his. "You're still my brother. The rest of it is just stories." She leaned on the wall, squinting up at the faint stars. "Father used to say the lone wolf dies, but the pack survives. You brought the pack together, Jon. Don't forget that." Then a tea. He almost smiled. "Sometimes I wonder if I brought the pack to ruin." Arya's mouth twisted into a feral grin. "Wolves don't care for ruin. They just keep running." Then, with a quick glance around, her tone grew serious. "If the Queen turns on you or the lords, you know you'll have us. All of us. Even Sansa." He nodded, his throat tight. "Thank you." Ghost rose silently beside them, pressing his great head into Jon's hand, red eyes fixed on the distant dragons. Jon scratched behind the wolf's ears, thinking of the future. Arya's words lingered, sharper than any blade. Rebuilding began with the slow return of order. The maesters tended the sick. The blacksmiths reforged armor and spearheads. The wise women gathered roots and herbs for the wounded. Sansa ruled the north from Winterfell's heart, quiet but unyielding, her calm voice turning away panic and fear. She held counsel with the great lords, listened to the grievances of small folk, saw to the fair division of food. Her word carried weight, and even the proudest northern banners bent to her will. But with every day, the question of what to do with the dragons, and Jon himself, grew louder. Some lords demanded the beasts be driven south, lest Winterfell become a target. Others whispered that Jon's blood was not truly Stark, that the return of dragons heralded Targaryen rule. In every corner of the castle, speculation ran wild. Was Jon the heir to the throne? Did he mean to take the north for himself? Or for Daenerys? Was he even entirely human, after what he had done with Viserion? The pressure mounted until, at last, a great council was called in the great hall. The banners of the North and Targaryen banners draped the stone walls, the air tense with expectation. Sansa sat in the high seat, flanked by Arya and Brienne. Daenerys sat opposite, regal and silent, with Tyrion and Grey Worm at her side. Jon stood between them, his face grim, a bridge between fire and ice. The Lord spoke in turn. Glover, Manderly, Umber, each voicing their fears and hopes, their distrust of southern politics and foreign dragons. Sansa answered them all, calm and unflinching, her words weaving together the memory of her father, the blood of her house, the reality of war. At last, Daenerys spoke. "The dead are gone because of our unity, because we stood together, dragon, wolf, and lion. If we fall to squabbling now, we will hand the realm back to Cersei Lannister on a golden platter. I will not let that happen." But I do not wish to rule over a land that fears me. I wish to be your ally, not your conqueror." The silence that followed was broken by Sansadai. "Words are wind, your grace. The North remembers. If you mean to be our ally, prove it. Let us decide our own fate. Let Jon rule the North as a Stark and as a bridge between us." Nanto. There was an outcry. Some lords shouting their approval, others their dissent. Jon tried to object, but Arya squeezed his arm, her eyes telling him to listen. Daenerys' gaze was sharp, her pride warring with reason. But she nodded. "If the North wishes Jon Snow as its king, so be it. I will recognize him, so long as he remains my ally against the South." Jon, stunned, could only bow his head. "I never wanted a crown," he said, voice low. "But I will not run from my duty." And so, before the banners of House Stark and Targaryen alike, Jon was proclaimed king in the North once more, this time by the will of the living and the legacy of the dead. After the council, Jon walked the snowy yard, the weight of the new crown heavy on his brow. Rhaegal and Viserion perched atop the ruined outer wall. Side by side, the snow melting on their warm scales, Jon approached them slowly, mindful of the uneasy peace that existed between living and undead, man and dragon. He reached out to Viserion first. The dragon's eyes flickered, gold, then blue, then gold again, as if the memory of the Night King's cold still lingered in him. But Viserion dipped his great head, allowing Jon to rest his palm against his brow. The touch was cold, but not lifeless. "You saved us," Jon whispered, his voice trembling. "And I'll not forget it." Rhaegal huffed, nuzzling Jon's shoulder with rough affection. For a moment, Jon let himself imagine a future where dragons soared over a peaceful realm. Their fury a memory, their power a promise of protection. A voice cut through his reverie. "Your Grace." It was Tyrion, appearing out of the drifting snow, cloak drawn tight. "Tyrion," Jon said, voice tired but kind. "If you've come to talk of war, it'll have to wait." Tyrion shook his head. "Not war. Peace. If such a thing is possible in this world." He glanced up at the dragons, his face a study in wonder and fear. "They listen to you, Jon, both of them. The people see it. And so do the lords." Jon frowned. "What are you saying?" Tyrion hesitated. "There are those who would see Daenerys replaced. She is beloved by some, but feared by more. You, on the other hand, are trusted by the North, and now by the dragons. Some say it's your destiny to rule all the 7 kingdoms." "Then?" Jon felt a coldness deeper than any winter settle in his gut. "I am no usurper." Tyrion shrugged. "Destiny is not always about want. Sometimes it's about need. The realm is in pieces, Jon. Someone must hold it together." Jon looked at the dragons, then at the battered towers of Winterfell. He thought of the battles yet to come. The scars of the dead. The fragile hope that flickered in the hearts of the living. "Let's win this war first, Tyrion. Then we can speak of peace." "Understand." Tyrion nodded, though Jon saw the wheels of calculation already turning behind the Lannisters' clever eyes. In the weeks that followed, Jon set about his new role. He met with the lords of the North, listened to their grievances, promised justice and protection. He rode out with Arya and Brienne to inspect the villages, Rhaegal and Viserion circling overhead like living banners. Where once the sight of dragons had struck terror, now there was something like pride in the way the small folk watched them, a symbol of survival, of defiance against death. Yet, not all was peace. South of the Neck, skirmishes broke out between Lannister loyalists and Northern patrols. Reports came of wildfires set in the Riverlands, of Greyjoy raids along the coast. Cersei's shadow stretched long and poisonous, her spies worming into even the highest ranks of Daenerys' council. Daenerys herself grew more distant, her mood darkening with every report of treachery or loss. She spent hours alone in the highest tower, watching the dragons, her face unreadable. Jon tried to reach her, but more and more, she slipped away. Caught in the whirlwind of grief and rage, that the Iron Throne had always summoned in those who sought it. Sansa, ever vigilant, kept a wary eye on the Queen and her advisors. She is not the woman you first met beyond the wall. Sansa told Jon one night. Power changes people, even those who mean to use it well. Be careful. Jon nodded, but there was little comfort to be found in caution. One night, Jon stood once more in the Godswood, seeking counsel from silent faces carved in weirwood. He knelt before the heart tree, ghost pressed to his side, the world silent except for the distant roar of dragons. Snow drifted in slow, heavy flakes, muffling even the cries of the night. I don't know what's coming, Jon said aloud. I've fought the dead. I've led men to slaughter, watched them die for a crown I never wanted. But I cannot turn away. Too many depend on me. If you're listening, Father, old gods, whoever, give me strength. Let me keep my people safe. Let me be worthy of them. Bah. The fire in his chest, never quite gone since the night he'd called Viserion back, burned a little brighter. He felt for a moment the touch of something vast and ancient, the weight of destiny pressing down. He rose, ready to face whatever storms remained. For in the land of ice and fire, peace was but a dream, forever just out of reach. But Jon Snow, rider of dragons, king in the north, would chase that dream as far as it would take him. Through fire and frost, betrayal and love, life and death, until his last breath melted into the endless snows. Kandi. The news from the south arrived with the bleakness of a raven's cry before dawn. The Lannisters had burned a swath through the Riverlands, leaving the blackened bones of villages behind, and the Golden Company's banners flew at the trident. Sansa read the raven's letter aloud to the council in Winterfell's solar, her voice even and clear, but each word was a stone in Jon's gut. The cost of every delay, every squabble, every uncertain alliance, they weighed on him like fresh links of chain. Tyrion's eyes lingered on the words, searching for angles. Arya sat in the window's shadow, her boots on the sill, watching the snow and the yard below, where Ghost and Rhaegal prowled, uneasy but restless for action. Daenerys listened in silence. Her fingers curled tight around the arms of her chair, knuckles white. Sansa finished and set the parchment down. They mean to cut the realm in two. If they hold the trident, the North and Vale are penned behind river and army. Our food, our people, all trapped. Daenerys' voice cut the silence like a whip. We break them. We burn them out, as we did the dead. Ben too. No, Jon said before Tyrion could open his mouth. Not with dragonfire. We're not conquerors. Not to these people. The North remembers. Burned fields, orphaned children, the cost of fire and blood. If we go south, we go to win hearts, not just the war. Arya's face flickered with something like approval, or maybe skepticism. She was too much her father's daughter for easy answers. Tyrion, as ever, was more pragmatic. A swift strike then. Viserion and Rhaegal could break their lines, scatter their horses. They have archers. Brienne cut in, her voice a deep warning. And the Golden Company is not a rabble. They've seen dragons before, across the narrow sea. Sansa turned to Jon, her eyes as cold and sharp as the snows beyond the wall. The North must be defended. If you ride south, what of Winterfell? The Vale will not risk their knights if the North leaves its gates open. Jon shook his head. I won't abandon the North. Not now. But we can't fight this war waiting behind walls. We need allies, houses with men and food to spare. We need the Riverlands. One. Daenerys nodded. Then we split our forces. I will go south with the dragons, with Jon. Jon stiffened. The lords won't like it. The North will see it as an invasion, not an alliance. Daenerys' voice was a flint, striking sparks. Then they'll have to accept it. The Iron Throne won't be won from Winterfell. If we wait, Cersei starves us out. It was Tyrion who ended the deadlock, as he so often did. Then we do both. Sansa holds Winterfell. Arya scouts the roads, keeps watch for Lannister spies. Jon and Daenerys ride south with the dragons. Strike where Cersei is weakest. Show the Riverlands the strength of wolf and dragon together. No burnings, no terror, just the promise of peace. Once the usurper is gone. Jon and Daenerys looked at each other. The same old argument burning in their eyes. Love and fear. Hope and doubt. But at last, Jon nodded, his voice low but unyielding. It's decided then. Ready the dragons. Outside in the pale noon, Rhaegal and Viserion waited. Rhaegal lowered his head for Jon's touch, scales warm and vibrant, his breath stirring Jon's hair with the scent of ashes and sky. Viserion, pale and silent, flicked his blue-gold eyes to Jon and Daenerys, then to the castle walls, a tension thrumming in the cold air around him. He was a creature pulled between worlds, not quite alive, not quite dead. But in Jon's presence, he seemed steadier, more himself. Daenerys reached up to Viserion, her voice soft in Valyrian, and after a moment he bowed to her hand. Jon watched her, heart aching for the gulf between what was lost and what remained. He wondered if the dragons felt it too, the sense of a past that could never quite be reclaimed, a future fragile as spun glass. He looked back at the castle. Sansa watched from the highest balcony, face unreadable. Arya stood with the guards at the gate, arms crossed, her gaze a blade cutting through the snow. Jon lifted his hand in silent farewell, and Arya gave him a little nod, just enough, the old promise that she'd watch over those he left behind. They flew south in the afternoon, the sun a pale disk above a world of white. Rhaegal's wings beat steady and strong, the air cold and sharp in Jon's lungs. Viserion flew beside them, pale smoke trailing from his nostrils, his movement less wild than before, but his shadow seemed to flicker in the light, as if the old magic of the Night King still clung to his bones. Daenerys rode behind Jon, her arms around his waist, her cheek pressed to his shoulder for warmth as much as comfort. Below, the world changed. The snow thinned, giving way to muddy earth and half-frozen rivers, forests stripped of leaves, villages huddled behind ramshackle palisades. Here and there Jon saw the scars of battle, charred farms, collapsed bridges, broken men limping along the road. The Riverlands had always been the realm's battleground, and in this new war, the wounds were fresh and festering. They landed at Seaguard on the third night, the dragons perching atop the ruined watchtower, their presence enough to bring every man on the walls running with drawn bows. But Jon rode at their head, his sword sheathed, and Daenerys beside him, her banners rolled. The garrison's captain, a grizzled man named Sir Lymond Mallister, met them in the yard, wary but not hostile. "I thought all the dragons were dead," he said, voice flat as the wind. "Some things come back," Jon answered. "If you'll have us, we fight for the Riverlands now." "Against the Lannisters." Mallister weighed them both, then looked to the dragons above. "And if we say no?" Jon met his eyes. "Then we go on. But every day Cersei holds the trident. More of your people will starve or burn. We need allies, not slaves. Help us, and the Riverlands will share in whatever peace comes after." Mallister spat into the mud, then held out his hand. "I never liked Lannisters much, and I like sellswords even less. You have my sword, Snow. So long as you keep your dragons leashed." Namten. The next week was a blur of mud, fire, and blood. The Golden Company, slow to believe that dragons truly flew the skies again, was routed outside Fairmarket by Rhaegal's fury and Jon's steel. Daenerys rode Viserion into battle for the first time since his return from the dead. Though his fire was paler and stranger than before, it was enough to shatter the enemy's lines. When the battle ended, she slid from his back weeping, her hands slick with the cold ichor that passed for Viserion's blood. Jon stood with her in the trampled field, the cries of the dying fading behind them, and she clung to him as if she might never let go. At every village they freed, Jon made the same speech. "We are not conquerors. We fight for the living, not for gold or crowns." And when the Riverlanders asked if he meant to be king, He answered only, "I mean to see my people safe." But news ran swift through the realm, and rumors swifter still. By the time they reached Harrenhal, men already whispered of the wolf and the dragon, who rode side by side, who slew the Sellswords with living fire, and brought the Riverlords to heel. Some called Daenerys a goddess, others a witch. Jon was called king and traitor and savior, sometimes all in the same breath. Harrenhal's halls were haunted by ghosts of 100 wars, but now Jon and Daenerys gathered their council there. Mallister, Blackwood, Frey bastards eager for revenge. Jon looked into their faces and saw men desperate for a future. Any future. That wasn't written in ash. He promised them fair laws, the restoration of old rights, protection from Lannister retribution. Daenerys spoke of a better realm, the wheel broken, no more tyrants. For a time the words held. But in the night, Jon wandered the ruin alone. He found Viserion on the shattered Godswood's edge, half shrouded in mist. The dragon's breath steamed in the dark, and his eyes were two lanterns. Blue, then gold, then blue again. Rhaegal circled above, never far from his brother. Jon approached Viserion, careful and slow. He placed his hand on the dragon's skull, feeling the cold pulse beneath the scales. "You're not what you were," Jon murmured. "But neither am I. Maybe that's enough." Viserion let out a low, mournful sound. A song Jon recognized from another world, another life. He sat in the snow beside the dragon until dawn, watching the mist rise and fall, listening for meaning in the silence. The campaign ground on and on. The Golden Company retreated to the Twins, fortifying the bridges and poisoning the fords. Euron Greyjoy's fleet torched the coasts, and Lannister outriders harried the supply lines. Jon and Daenerys moved swiftly, striking at weak points, burning out pockets of resistance with fire and steel. But everywhere they went, the cost was mounting. The people they freed cheered them, but many more fled at the sight of dragons, memories of fire still too fresh to trust promises. Jon rode into villages with bread instead of swords, offering the protection of the North to any who would join them. He met with Edmure Tully in the rubble of Riverrun, old loyalties flickering to life like candles in the wind. They took the city after a hard siege, Rhaegal's flame melting the last of the iron gates, and Edmure knelt to Daenerys and Jon both. But in every council, the talk returned to Winterfell, to the north, to Sansa's rule and the quiet threat of division. Daenerys' face was tight with strain, her words more brittle. She slept little, and when she did, she dreamed of fire. Always fire, burning everything she loved. One night, as rain lashed the stone towers of Harrenhal, Daenerys came to Jon's chambers. She was pale, her eyes bright and wild in the candlelight. She wore a simple gown, her hair loose about her shoulders. "Do you trust me?" she asked, her voice small. "With my life," Jon answered. She took his hand and placed it over her heart. "They love you, Jon. Even those who fear you, they love you. You could take the throne. If you asked, you could have it all." Jon's throat closed. "I don't want it. But you have it, all the same. I see how they look at you." She stepped closer, trembling. "If I lose you, if I lose the North, what am I?" Jon held her, his heart aching. "You're my queen. You're the hope the world needs." "Then so." She closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Then let's end this. Together." They stood that way until the candles guttered, the world beyond the window lost in rain and smoke. Winter's end came slowly to the Riverlands, but word came at last that Cersei had pulled back to King's Landing, her forces battered but unbroken. Euron's fleet still ruled the Blackwater, but the Golden Company was shattered, its remnants holed up in the city. Jon summoned his bannermen. "We march for King's Landing," he said. "This ends now." Daenerys addressed the troops, her voice a clarion in the cold air. "I will break the wheel. No more queens made of ash. No more war for the sake of war. Stand with me, and I will bring peace." Together, they rode at the head of the army, dragons wheeling overhead. Rhaegal and Viserion swept down upon the outer defenses, their fire. One golden, one ghostly, breaking the gates and scattering the defenders. Jon led the charge through the city's ruined streets, sword in hand, ghost at his side. The battle for King's Landing was chaos. Wildfire in the alleys, arrows falling from the walls, the screams of the dying rising above the roar of dragons. Jon fought his way through the Red Keep's blood-slick corridors, Daenerys at his side, her face set with grief and fury. He found Cersei at the heart of her broken throne room, her gown torn, her crown crooked, blood on her hands. She sneered at him, defiant to the end. "So the bastard comes to claim the crown," she spat. "I come for peace," Jon said, and for the first time he almost believed it. "It's over." She laughed, wild and bitter. "Peace? There's no peace for monsters. No peace for queens." Daenerys stepped forward, her voice trembling with rage and sorrow. "You burned the realm for your throne. No more." Cersei reached for a dagger, but Arya's blade was swifter, sudden, silent, and final. The lioness fell with a sigh, the war ending not in glory, but in quiet death. The city surrendered with the dawn. Jon and Daenerys stood side by side in the broken hall, the Iron Throne a twisted ruin behind them. Rhaegal and Viserion circled above the shattered city, their shadows dark against the rising sun. The realm at last was theirs. But as Jon looked out over the city, its people dazed, its streets running with rain and ash, he felt no triumph, only the weight of all that had been lost, and all that would never be reclaimed. He turned to Daenerys, her face streaked with soot and tears. She reached for him, and together they faced the uncertain dawn, the promise of peace as fragile and precious as the breath of dragons in the new day. Wah. Ai. Kai. Winter lingered long in King's Landing, even after the city had surrendered, and the banners of Lannister and Baratheon were torn down. The river fogs rolled in with the dawn, cold and gray, smothering the ruined city beneath a shroud that made ash and snow indistinguishable. In the streets, the survivors picked through rubble, their faces wary, eyes always searching the skies for the shadow of wings, half in fear, half in hope. Jon Snow stood on the balcony of Maegor's Holdfast, staring out at the city below. The palace's upper halls still smelled of wildfire and smoke. And even here, in the highest rooms, the chill found its way through cracks and broken panes. Rhaegal and Viserion perched on the blackened remnants of the Tower of the Hand, their wings folded, eyes unblinking. The city's silence was broken only by the distant caw of crows and the low, almost mournful sounds the dragons made when the wind turned from the north. Behind Jon, Daenerys stood at a table strewn with maps and letters, her hair braided with silver and black, her eyes darker than he remembered. She'd barely slept since the city fell. Each day brought reports: riots in Flea Bottom, new fires in the market, red priests and sparrows and exiles from Essos, all vying for a place in the new world she'd promised. Her voice was soft, but it carried an edge of steel. "The Lords of the Reach have sent a delegation. They demand to see the king." Jon turned, rubbing his eyes. "I'm not their king." She arched an eyebrow. "You are, or close enough. They won't speak to me without you." She paused, searching his face. "You've barely left this room." He looked away, toward the dragons and the city still licking its wounds. "I killed for peace, and all I see is more war." She crossed the distance between them, laying her hand over his heart. "You kept your word. The city is yours. Ours. It's only the beginning." He covered her hand with his. "That's what I fear." He didn't say the rest. That the people below looked at Daenerys with awe and terror. That the lords who had gathered in the scorched halls of the Red Keep offered oaths and gifts with eyes that never rested. He didn't say that every step forward felt like walking deeper into a labyrinth of ghosts. There was a knock at the door. Missandei entered, grave and graceful. "The council is assembled. Your graces." Jon nodded. Daenerys squeezed his hand before turning to gather her cloak, her spine straightening as she donned the mantle of queen. The throne room was changed. The Iron Throne itself was nothing but twisted, half-melted iron now, warped by dragonfire and the collapse of the ceiling above. In its place, A simple high-backed chair of dark wood stood upon the dais, draped in the banners of House Targaryen and Stark. The courtiers and lords assembled below, many still in mourning black, their voices low and cautious. Sansa stood at Jon's right, cloaked in silver gray and wolf fur, her eyes as sharp as the wind on the wall. Arya flanked her, leather-clad, her hand resting on the pommel of Needle. Davos was there, and Tyrion, and the surviving lords of the Vale, Riverlands, and Reach. The small folk watched from the shadows near the pillars, silent but attentive. Daenerys addressed the hall with the calm authority that had won her the Dothraki, the Unsullied, and now, the city. King's Landing is not just the capital. It is a promise of peace, of justice, of a new beginning. She named Jon as Warden of the North and hand to the crown, and with each word, the ripples of dissent in the hall grew quieter. She spoke of repairing walls, feeding the hungry, and pardoning old enemies, unless they broke faith again. Jon spoke after, his voice carrying not just in the hall, but out the broken windows into the city beyond. I have seen too much death. We will have no more tyrants, no more wars for thrones or banners. We will have law and mercy and the peace we've bled for. Then Danal. Later, Sansa found him in the Godswood, which the Tyrells had replanted in the palace gardens after the war. The heart tree no more than a sapling struggling for light. They listen to you, she said, her tone both proud and weary. But peace won't last if the lords see you as Daenerys' puppet. He looked at her, old affection and rivalry in his eyes. I'm no one's puppet, but I am hers. I chose this, chose her. And when the choosing is done, Sansa asked, the North still wants its own. We won't kneel forever, Jon, not even for you. Bendauer. He hesitated. The North is yours, Sansa. It always was. I never wanted a crown. She smiled, bittersweet. You always wanted to do the right thing. That's why we follow you. She glanced at the sky, where Rhaegal circled with Viserion close behind. I'll keep the North, if you'll keep the dragons from burning the South. He smiled back, grim but grateful. A fair bargain. They ruled together, not as king and queen, but as partners. Daenerys blazing with vision, Jon the stone she leaned upon when the world turned cruel. They sat in council with lords and smallfolk, Dothraki khals and ironborn captains, hearing grievances and weighing justice. Tyrion served as their voice in the city. Davos kept the fleets honest. Arya moved like a shadow through the underbelly, rooting out Lannister loyalists and spies. Yet for all the council's work, the city was slow to heal. Famine stalked the poorer wards. Disease followed. Jon visited the soup lines with Arya, speaking to mothers and orphans, promising bread and safety. Sometimes he brought Ghost, whose presence quieted even the wildest crowds. Once, he rode Rhaegal above the Blackwater, the dragon's shadow alone enough to scatter bandits at the city gates. But everywhere, the memory of fire and death lingered. When Daenerys rode Viserion through the city, the crowds parted in silence, crossing themselves and bowing low. Some left offerings of flowers and burnt bones at the foot of the ruined sept, uncertain whether to pray for mercy or forgiveness. It was Varys, restored from exile at Tyrion's urging, who gave words to what many feared. The realm is united by necessity, not love. Old wounds fester, and hungry men have long memories. You need victories, Jon. Small ones, if not great. Damn. So Jon turned his attention to the outer lands, sending aid to the Reach and Riverlands, granting the Stormlands to Gendry Baratheon, legitimizing the bastard of Blackwater. He sent Arya to the Dornish border, where she met with Princess Arianne and brokered peace between the Martells and the Crown. Sansa rebuilt the north, restoring Wintertown and settling wildlings as new farmers along the Gift. The Vale, ever cautious, pledged its banners to House Stark, so long as Jon's hand remained steady. Still, not all was well. Euron Greyjoy remained at sea, a pirate king unchecked. The Golden Company's survivors scattered to the winds, some turning outlaw, others making common cause with Dothraki stragglers, or with the old Brotherhood without banners. There were rumors, too, of sorcerers and priests gathering in the ruins of Old Town, plotting the end of dragons. One night, Jon stood on the ramparts of the Red Keep, watching the dragons circle in the moonlight. Rhaegal was bold and steady, his breath curling in golden clouds. Viserion flew beside him, graceful but strange, his fire pale and cold, his movements never quite at ease. Jon often wondered if some part of the Night King's magic remained in him, a shadow in the blood, a memory of death. Daenerys joined him, wrapped in a heavy cloak. "You always find the coldest places," she teased, her breath steaming. He smiled, tired but content. "I was never meant for warmth." She rested her head on his shoulder. "Nor I. But together, maybe we can be something more." "Bendawansal." He nodded, feeling the truth of it in the slow, steady beat of his heart. She watched the dragons for a while. "Do you ever wonder if we've done the right thing? If all this death was worth it?" He didn't answer right away. "I wonder every night. But then I look at the city. The people who survived. The ones who never would have if we'd turned away. I remember my father's words. The man who passes the sentence should swing the sword. We've both swung it. Now we carry what comes after." She took his hand, her fingers entwined with his. "Then let's carry it together." Winter broke at last, with a day of soft rain and sudden sunlight. Crocuses pushed through the ashen mud. Small folk strung colored flags between the gutted houses of the street of silk. The city, though scarred, began to hum with life. Jon walked the market with Arya and Gendry, buying fresh bread and honeyed wine, listening to the gossip. Some called Daenerys the Silver Queen, others Breaker of Chains, some whispering, called her the Dragon's Shadow. Jon's own names ranged from Snowkin to Stark's Ghost to the Last Watcher. He did not care for any of them. Arya laughed at the names, jostling him like the girl she had been. "If they fear you, they'll behave, at least until you're gone." He grinned. "And then you'll have to keep them honest." She elbowed him. "You know I will." They returned to the Red Keep at sunset, where Sansa and Daenerys waited in the garden, speaking quietly with Tyrion and Missandei. The council met beneath the spreading branches of the new heart tree, the sapling now bearing its first red leaves. Together, they laid out plans for a great council. Lords and ladies from every corner of the realm, come to decide the future not by war, but by consent. "Let the people see we are not tyrants," Daenerys declared. "Let them see a new way." The council was called. Lords Arryn and Royce rode from the Eyrie, Tarlis and Redwynes from the Reach, Tully and Blackwood from the Riverlands. From Dorne, Princess Arianne came, and from the Iron Islands, Yara Greyjoy, battered but unbowed. In the throne room, before the battered remnants of the Iron Throne, Jon addressed them all. "We are not the children of war. Not anymore. Let us build something that will last. A council of the realm. A promise of peace." The debate raged for days. Old grudges, new alliances, and always the undercurrent of suspicion. But Jon and Daenerys held firm, refusing to rule by fear or force. When the final day dawned, the lords voted. The North would remain independent, with Sansa as its queen. The Riverlands and Vale would swear fealty to the crown, but keep their ancient rights. The Iron Islands and Dorne would have self-rule, so long as they bent no knee to any foreign king. Daenerys was crowned queen of the Seven Kingdoms, though now they numbered fewer, and Jon was named protector of the realm, his own titles shaped by duty, not birthright. Rhaegal and Viserion soared above the city, their cries echoing like trumpets of a new age. Peace came, fragile and new, like the first shoots of green after a bitter winter. Jon and Daenerys ruled side by side, balancing justice with mercy. Arya sailed west, restless for adventure. Tyrion rebuilt the city's finances, Davos restored the fleets, Gendry rebuilt the forges. The dragons flew farther each day, ranging over fields and mountains. A living promise that the old world was not dead, only changed. And sometimes, on quiet nights, Jon walked the city alone, Ghost at his side, listening to the laughter and music rising from the taverns, the prayers whispered in half-ruined septs, the dreams of children born into a world he had helped shape. He knew the peace would not last forever. Nothing ever did. But for a while, at least, the realm breathed. The dragon soared, and the long night was done. In the end, Jon Snow, bastard King Dragonrider, was content to watch the sun rise over a city no longer burning, with the woman he loved beside him and hope, at last, stirring on the wind. Kai. When the great council ended, and the last lords departed beneath the banners of their own choosing, King's Landing breathed a new air, uncertain but freer. The scars of the last war could not be erased. Ruined blocks still gaped like broken teeth. The sept was a blackened shell, the red keep itself patched by hasty repairs. But slowly, the city turned its face to the sun. Fishermen returned to the black water. Farmers brought wares to market. Children played on the steps beneath towers, where not long ago the dead had walked. Yet the specter of war, though banished for now, lingered on the edge of every thought. Jon Snow felt it more keenly than most. He stood at the city's outer wall one evening, the gold and rose of dusk painting the ruined rooftops. Ghost sat beside him, tongue lolling, every muscle relaxed for the first time in years. Far above, Rhaegal and Viserion soared as brothers, their wings catching the dying light, their voices echoing across the river like a memory of the ancient world. He was not alone. Daenerys approached in a simple gray cloak, her hair loose and shining. She watched the dragons a long while before speaking, her words soft as the wind. "They're healing." Jon nodded. "So is the city." She took his hand, her thumb brushing a scar on his knuckles, tracing each old wound as if reading a story. "And you?" He watched the dragons, remembering fire and snow, blood and rebirth. "I don't know if I ever will, but I'm not alone. That's more than I ever hoped for." She smiled, bittersweet and wise. "The world will always need healing, Jon. That's the truth I've learned. But it needs hope too." They watched together until the sun dipped below the sea, and the first stars came out above the black water. Peace was not built in a day. The city's wounds ran deep, and with every passing month new challenges emerged. When the riverlands suffered drought, Daenerys sent relief grain from the Reach. When Dornish traders complained of unfair tariffs, Jon sat with their prince in the council chamber, negotiating until both sides left satisfied, if not happy. Yara Greyjoy returned to the Iron Islands, her ships pledged to protect trade rather than raid coasts, but her restless captains often tested the fragile treaties. At times, it seemed that the Iron Throne, now just a high seat of carved wood and stone, rested on shifting sand. Yet in the midst of these troubles, small things began to bloom. The first new bells rang in the city's rebuilt sept, and on the day the great market reopened, thousands crowded the squares. Arya returned briefly from her voyages west, lean and sun-dark, her eyes alight with the wonders she'd seen, and her pockets full of strange coins. Sansa sent envoys from the north, speaking of new grain stores and free wildling villages rising near the wall. Daenerys governed with a fierce but measured hand, refusing to let her advisors turn mercy to weakness or strength to cruelty. She walked the streets, unguarded save for Missandei and Grey Worm, listening to petitions from cobblers and blacksmiths. Jon often joined her, sometimes in plain wool, sometimes in the black and silver cloak the city now knew as his. The small folk called them the Wolf and the Dragon, and for once the names were spoken without fear. Still, Jon felt the old ghosts sometimes. In dreams, he saw the dead walk again, icy eyes staring from alleyways, flames leaping over battlements, faces he could not save. Viserion was often in those dreams, sometimes burning, sometimes circling overhead, always a harbinger of some choice Jon had yet to make. One such night, he woke before dawn, sweat cold on his brow. Ghost nuzzled his hand, and for a while Jon sat on the edge of the bed, staring into the dark. The city was quiet, but above, he heard the beating of wings, a familiar, comforting rhythm. He dressed and slipped from the keep, boots silent on the stone. In the ruined yard by the god's wood sapling, he found Viserion waiting. The dragon's breath hung pale in the air, frost and light swirling together. Rhaegal was away, hunting above the Blackwater, so it was only Jon and the dragon that death could not keep. Jon approached slowly, offering his palm. Viserion lowered his head. His eyes were a strange, shifting gold, no longer haunted by the cold blue of the Night King. Jon pressed his hand to the dragon's brow, feeling the deep pulse beneath the scales. A strange echo. Half warmth, half chill. It was not life as he had known, but it was enough. He spoke softly. Words meant as much for himself as for the beast. We're both changed, but we're not broken. Nensano. Viserion rumbled, a deep rolling sound. It was the closest Jon had ever heard to laughter. With the city secure, Daenerys and Jon began to look beyond the walls. The realm was fractured by years of war and winter. Villages in the Stormlands had gone silent. Trade to the Westerlands faltered as old gold mines failed. A sickness had struck Old Town. Some whispered it was a curse left by maesters loyal to Cersei. Others that it was the shadow of winter's end. Jon rode out with Davos and a company of Northmen, taking Rhaegal over the green hills and battered towns. In the Stormlands, they put down a band of Gold Company mercenaries, turned bandit. At the Manor, Jon knelt to a weeping mother whose daughter had starved in the famine. He left his cloak to cover her child, swearing to send aid. In the Reach, he sat with Sam Tarly and the new maester, helping them organize the first new harvest in years. Word spread. In every village, Jon heard stories, some true, some wild fantasy, about the Dragon King who wept for orphans, who fought beside his wolf, who listened before he judged. It was the kind of legend he hated, but he saw its power in the way men and women stood taller after he left, the way children followed his shadow in the dust. Daenerys remained in King's Landing, overseeing the city's rebuilding. She sponsored the founding of a new order of healers, drawn from Essos and the Free Cities, as well as Westeros. She set aside gold for an orphanage, put an end to the old trial by combat custom, and created a council of merchants and smiths to advise her on the needs of the small folk. When Jon returned, battered and weary, she welcomed him home with open arms, her laughter a balm to his wounds. One evening, word arrived that a fleet of ironborn ships had been sighted off the Westerlands. Yaris banners flew at their mast, but no one could say if she meant trade or war. Jon and Daenerys convened their council at once. Tyrion, older and more silver-bearded now, offered a wry smile. If Yara's come for trouble, she'll find the city less welcoming than before. But I think she knows a realm divided is an invitation to every would-be king. Now, Sansa, visiting from Winterfell, was less sanguine. Yara has always followed her own course. If she means to test the peace, she'll do it with fire and steel. Daenerys' eyes narrowed, thoughtful. We will greet her as allies, not enemies. But I will not let the Iron Islands break the realm again. Jon nodded. Let her come. If she wants peace, she'll find it. If she wants war, we'll answer with dragons. 2 days later, Yara herself rode through the city gates, her captains behind her. She strode into the council chamber with her salt-stained cloak and easy grin, greeting Jon with a clap on the shoulder and Daenerys with a bow. I bring trade, not swords, she said. Fish, timber, salt, and grain from the Summer Islands. All I ask is fair harbor, and a place at the table. They gave her both, and for the first time since the wars began, ships from every kingdom crowded the Blackwater. Jon watched them from the city wall, remembering the long empty years when every sail had meant fear. As summer returned, the city celebrated the birth of Daenerys' first child, a daughter, with her mother's silver hair and Jon's gray eyes. Bells rang out across the city, and the council proclaimed a week of feasts. People came from as far as the north and Dorne to witness the babe named Rhaella Snow, her cradle guarded by Ghost and watched over by both dragons. Jon cradled the child beneath the weirwood sapling one dusk, Daenerys beside him, the dragons curled nearby, their great eyes gentle. He marveled at the fragility and hope that radiated from so small a life. shall know a better world," Daenerys said. "That's our gift to her." He nodded, heart aching with gratitude and dread. "I'll keep her safe, I swear it." Years passed. The city's wounds faded, the realm's peace held. Never perfect, never without threat, but strong enough. Arya sailed east, and her tales came back in letters full of marvels and dangers. Sansa ruled the north with wisdom, raising new keeps and bringing the wildlings and Northmen together. Gendry, now Lord of Storm's End, wed a Reach Maiden and brought the Baratheon name to new strength. Even Tyrion found joy, remarrying and fathering a son who made the council meetings more chaotic than ever. And Jon? He lived as he'd always dreamed in his quietest moments. Not as king, not as legend, but as a father, a brother, a man. He flew with Rhaegal and Viserion, taught his daughter to ride, walked the city's streets with Ghost, judged disputes and dispensed justice, grieved and loved, bled and healed. He missed the old world sometimes, the wildness of the wall, the hard simplicity of blackened snow. But when he looked at Daenerys, at Rhaella in her arms, at the dragon soaring above a city reborn, he knew the truth. The story of war was not the story's end. Life went on. Hope endured. And so Jon Snow, dragon rider and wolf, was at last at peace. Not for the world, perhaps, but for himself, and for those he loved in the new dawn. Ya, Ka, Kemti. Autumn came on slow golden wings, drifting through the city and out into the green heart of Westeros. The air was crisp, with the promise of harvest. Above King's Landing, banners fluttered not just for the Queen, but for all the realms now bound in an uneasy peace. Wolf, dragon, sun, kraken, rose, stag, and more. Rhaegal and Viserion still swept the skies, but their shadows no longer brought screams. Instead, they sent children running to rooftops, eyes wide, laughing and waving, dreaming of wings. Jon Snow rode the southern roads more often now, half his life in the saddle and half in the council chamber. But for the first time in memory, he did not ride as a soldier. He visited towns rebuilding from ash and famine. He met with new lords, some young, some crippled by old wounds, all wearier now than they'd ever been of easy promises. He offered patience, justice, and the living presence of a Stark among them. Most offered loyalty in return, and those that did not, Jon listened all the same, for sometimes he heard old anger that could be healed by listening alone. In Golden Grove, he spent a day with the new Lady Rowan, discussing irrigation and wild boars. At the Manor, he helped mediate a feud between apple growers and millers, winning a cautious truce by agreeing to sample both sides' cider. He traveled alone, or sometimes with Davos. Sometimes Arya when she was in port. He left the dragons to Daenerys and the city, trusting her more than himself to wield that power with care. Each homecoming was different, but always the same. The city's crowds parted for him, some still calling Snow King or Wolf of Summer, most just nodding as he passed with Ghost trotting at his side. The markets grew fuller by the week, filled with figs and pears, the first salted fish of the season, and new songs from the free cities. Even the air tasted different, less smoke, more spice. At the Red Keep, Daenerys awaited him. She had grown into her rule as a woman grows into a long cloak, weighty but warm, settling at her shoulders with a natural grace. Their daughter Rhaella toddled through the gardens, her hair a shining river of silver, her laughter pealing like a bell. Missandei watched her, smiling, and gray worms unsullied kept discreet guard beyond the hedges, their spears resting but never far. Jon found peace in these moments, though he never forgot how hard won and fleeting peace could be. He often met Sansa in the council chamber, now sunlit and filled with the maps and records of a functioning realm. She arrived twice each year from Winterfell, her presence a bracing wind that cleared away complacency. She brought news of the north, wildlings and old families, new ships from White Harbor, a bear sighted near Skagos, the hard winter grain that now filled the cellars of Wintertown. She governed wisely, but not without challenge. The Karstarks and Umbers still bristled at every slight, and not all wildlings took to settled life. You have it easier here. Sansa teased one afternoon, glancing out at the city. Jon shook his head. Here they plot in whispers and buy daggers with gold instead of snow. I'd sooner face a bear than a clever courtier with poison in his cup. Sansa's smile was sly. That's why we survive, Jon. Starks prefer cold honesty. He found comfort in her presence, and was reminded too of what he had left behind to win this uneasy truce. Yet he did not regret it, not when he saw Rhaella chase after Ghost, or watched Daenerys read over harvest reports by candlelight, brow furrowed in concentration. There were times when Sansa and Daenerys clashed in council, always polite, sometimes cold, never fatal. Each saw in the other a different vision of what the realm could be. Sansa cautious, proud of old rights. Daenerys bold, dreaming of new unity. Jon often played the bridge, smoothing words, mediating when pride threatened progress. He knew that the peace between wolf and dragon was as fragile as any treaty, and he guarded it fiercely. Arya returned again before the first snows, her hair shorn and sun-browned, with a weather-beaten Valyrian steel dagger at her belt and strange tales from distant shores. She spent her days with Rhaella, teaching the girl to climb, to sneak, to trust her instincts. At night she dined with Jon and Daenerys, telling of jungles and ruined cities, of shipwreck and narrow escapes. One evening, Arya and Jon climbed the highest tower in the Red Keep to watch the dragons fly. They sat side by side, boots dangling over the drop, a skin of wine between them. "Do you ever miss the road?" Arya asked, voice quiet. Jon stared out over the city, thinking of black nights on the wall, the bite of wind on his face. "Sometimes, but there's peace in making something last. In building, not just fighting." Arya bumped his shoulder. "I'm glad you stayed. The world's a bit less lonely knowing you're here." He grinned. "You'll always have a place to come back to." "Not sure I'll ever stop running," Arya admitted. But she smiled as she said it, eyes shining. They watched as Rhaegal and Viserion tumbled through the air, fire chasing shadow, brothers at play. In winter, sickness swept through the city. Old Town's healers arrived to help, and Daenerys opened the palace cellars for the poor. Jon visited the sick houses, Rhaella bundled against his chest, Daenerys beside him, her presence quieting even the most fearful. One night, as he knelt by the bed of a dying baker, the man grasped Jon's hand, tears in his eyes. "You saved us from the dead, my lord. Save us now." Jon squeezed the man's hand. "Will not abandon you. Rest." The baker died before dawn, but his words stayed with Jon. He pushed the council to build more hospitals, to train new healers. Rhaegal carried medicine to distant villages, and Viserion, whose frostfire burned away the worst of the fever in one afflicted hamlet, became legend anew, a white dragon bringing not death, but deliverance. Daenerys was tireless, and the people saw it. For the first time, their loyalty was earned, not demanded. The peace grew deeper, though never complete. Some nights, distant fires on the horizon warned of bandit lords, ex-Golden Company, or iron-born raiders grown bold. Each time, Jon rode out, and each time, he returned. A little more tired, but still unbeaten. The child grew, quick and willful, as strong-willed as her mother, as stubborn as her father. When Rhaella turned 5, the city erupted in festival. A great pageant on the Blackwater. Singers in every square, merchants from Bravos and Korth. Rhaella herself rode atop Rhaegal, laughing, while Viserion wheeled protectively above. The lords and ladies of the realm assembled to swear new oaths to the future. Sansa brought a white wolf pup from the north, Gendry a bracelet of hammered gold and jet, Arya a knife from the Shadowlands. That night, after the feasts had faded, and the city lay quiet beneath its blanket of banners, Jon wandered the Godswood garden, Rhaella asleep in his arms. Daenerys joined him, wrapping her arms around them both. "We did this," she whispered, voice thick with wonder. "We made something new." Jon pressed his lips to her brow. "It will last." She looked up, eyes shining with fierce hope. Even If it doesn't, we tried. No one can say we didn't try. For the first time, Jon felt the old weight of prophecy and blood fade. Here was his family, here was peace, and he wanted for nothing more. But history is a wheel. Not every soul in the realm was content. In the western hills, a shadow gathered. Former Lannister bannermen, grumbling of lost rights, gathered in secret. Dispossessed sellswords, smuggled arms from the free cities, and whispers of a true heir to the throne. All these brewed like storm clouds over the horizon. The first sign came with a burning barn near Fair Isle and a letter found nailed to the door. The Lion remembers. Jon rode west with Ghost, Davos, and 100 loyal riders. The dragons soaring above. Daenerys refusing to remain behind. They found the ringleaders at a ruined sept, desperate, half-starved, yet burning with hate. Jon spoke to them not as king but as a brother who'd lost, bled, and survived. Some bent the knee, broken by time. Others spat and reached for swords. But this time, the city did not burn. The dragons did not fly. Instead, the traitors were brought to King's Landing and judged by council. Some were pardoned, others sent to the Wall, rebuilt now as a refuge for the realms lost. Daenerys and Jon stood in the great square and declared that the age of fire and blood was over. No more rule by terror, no more thrones of swords. Law would guide the realm now, and mercy would temper justice. Years passed. Rhaella grew into her namesake's courage, learning to ride, to judge, to lead. Arya sailed east and west, riding her brother with tales of marvel and peril. Sansa ruled the north, fierce and wise, never losing her sense of what it meant to be of the old blood. Gendry, Davos, even Tyrion aged but did not falter, each taking pride in what they had built and defended. Jon grew gray at the temples, the lines about his eyes deepening. But his voice never lost its quiet strength. Ghost limped, slower now, but still prowled at his side. Rhaegal was steady and wise, and Viserion, whose fire burned both cold and warm, became a living bridge between what was and what could be. In his last years, Jon found himself standing by the heart tree, watching Rhaella and her friends, Northern, Southern, Dornish, and Reach, Wildling and Lord's daughter, laugh beneath the boughs, dragons soaring high above, the realm at peace. It was enough. He closed his eyes, listening to the quiet, letting the warmth of summer and the voices of those he loved fill him, and knew at last he had kept his promise. The realm was safe, the world changed, and the long winter was gone. The story of Jon Snow, dragon rider and wolf, did not end with a war, nor with a throne, but with a legacy of hope. A peace wrought from blood and loss, kept by love, and handed at last to a new generation, born beneath the wings of dragons and the light of a gentler dawn. When spring returned, it came gently, first as a green haze in the royal gardens, and then as a soft wind winding up from the Dornish marches. The city, which had grown used to the weight of banners and armor, felt lighter, as if the ghosts of siege and famine had finally slipped away on the morning tide. The streets, once haunted by silence and suspicion, now rang with hammers, laughter, and the drone of vendors hawking apricots, roses, ribbons, and honey wine. Peace was becoming a habit. Jon Snow walked these streets with Ghost at his side, and a patience born of hard winters. He spoke with fishmongers and smiths, asked after sick children and ailing parents, remembered the names of those who had lost sons to the long war or the brief, brutal plague that followed. Sometimes Rhaella, now a girl of 7, came with him, riding high on his shoulders, her silver hair plaited back by Arya's sure fingers. The people bowed or nodded, but many simply smiled, recognizing the unadorned cloak, the direwolf, the honest words. Jon wore no crown, and when he walked the city, he felt something close to contentment, an unfamiliar, precious thing. Inside the Red Keep, Daenerys ruled with a steady hand. She held court in a hall, where tapestries replaced melted swords and children's. Laughter echoed from the gardens. She listened to merchants and lords, but also to washerwomen, and former slaves. Her reforms were many: new granaries for the poor, the end of debtors' prisons, a city guard that counted women and wildlings among its number. The great ships of the Iron Islands and Dorne now brought fruit, silk, and wine up the Blackwater, not fire and steel. Yara's fleet patrolled the narrow sea against pirates, and Princess Ariane sent letters of bright wit and sharper counsel every month. It was a time of mending, though not without trouble. Old rivalries flared. Sometimes in council, sometimes in market brawls, sometimes in the letters Sansa sent from the north, chiding the crown's agents for heavy-handedness or inattention. But even Sansa, ever the skeptic, had to admit that the realm was healing. Arya visited often but never stayed long. She arrived with the wind and left with the tide, a legend on both sides of the narrow sea. She brought gifts for Rhaella, obsidian beads, foreign coins, a Braavosi blade. For Jon and Daenerys she carried only stories and warnings, which they valued more. Arya's shadow fell across distant lands, and more than once the news she carried let Jon avert some threat before it grew to violence. It was not perfect. The Reach still brooded over lost privilege. The Westerlands, emptied of Lannisters, turned inward and sour. Some in the city muttered about a North too proud, a queen too foreign. There were rumors of sorcerers gathering in the ruins of Old Town, and sometimes red priests preached in the squares, promising fire or doom. But nothing caught flame. The dragons circled every sunrise and sunset, and the memory of fire kept swords sheathed. The dragons themselves were a story that ran through every tongue in Westeros. Rhaegal, proud and bold, patrolled the skies above the city and along the rivers, his green-gold wings casting a vast shadow over field and forest. He basked on the towers in sunlight, his great eyes gentle with Rhaella and keen with strangers. Viserion, his cold fire faded now to a cool blue glow, preferred the high places and the deep night, gliding over the moonlit sea, watching ships and gulls from above. Children left flowers and feathers at the old sept, where Viserion once burned white with death. Now the sept was rebuilt, and the people called it the Sanctuary of the Dragon's Mercy. Old fears never entirely vanished, especially when Viserion roared. But awe replaced dread. Jon visited both dragons daily, speaking to them in the tongue of old Valyria and the quiet language of touch. He sensed in them an ancient wisdom, a balance between flame and frost, wildness and calm. When Rhaella first climbed Rhaegal's back, the city gathered to watch. She gripped the dragon's scales with fearless delight, her laughter mingling with his thunderous bellow. Daenerys watched from the parapet, her hand on Jon's shoulder, tears glinting in her eyes. "You never rode as a child," she whispered. "She will know the sky as her birthright." Jon smiled, remembering the terror and wonder of that first wild flight north of the Wall. "Shall know peace too. That's what we've won." Daenerys squeezed his hand. "Let's make it last." One spring day, news came of trouble at the Wall. Wildlings in the new settlements along the Gift had clashed with old northern lords over land and hunting rights. There was talk of a free folk king beyond Eastwatch, gathering the discontented under a red banner. Sansa's raven was blunt. "The peace you brokered here is fraying. Come north or it will unravel." Jon answered at once. He left Daenerys in King's Landing, trusting her with the realm. Rhaella begged to come, but he refused. She was too young for hard travel, and besides, someone had to show the city that the future would not be won on Dragonback alone. He rode north with Davos, Gendry, and a few loyal captains, taking only Ghost and a small honor guard. The journey was swift but harsh, the snows late in melting. In Winterfell, Sansa met him in her own hall, regal in blue and white, her hair streaked with silver now but her gaze as sharp as ever. "It's not just the lords," she said, pacing the solar. "Some wildlings won't settle. They want to roam, hunt, live as they did before. But the old houses want order, taxes, oaths, boundaries. They fear raids and vanished daughters. We've had 2 brawls, 3 barns burned, and the beginnings of a feud." Mensawa. Jon listened, silent. When she finished, he nodded. Let's meet them. Both sides. I want every voice heard. They rode to the edge of the gift, where wildling camps dotted the old hills, smoke curling from turf houses and hides. There, Jon met with Tormund Giantsbane, grayer but not diminished, and the new free folk chief. A sharp-eyed girl of 18 named Ygritte. After her mother lost to the night, the talks were long and loud, interrupted by boasts, laughter, and old grudges. Jon kept the peace by reminding them all of what winter had taken, of the dead that none wished to see return. With Sansa's help, he drew new borders, set aside lands for hunting and farming, and created councils with both wildlings and Northmen. Tormund made a speech so rude and funny that even the most humorless of the Stark bannermen laughed. Ygritte offered Jon a carved bone knife, declaring him King Crow, who rides the storms. By the time Jon left, the fires were burning brighter, and new feasts were planned, not raids. He lingered in Winterfell just long enough to walk the Godswood and say goodbye to the spirits who'd watched him grow. Sansa took his hand at the gate. "The North will always be home," she said. "Even if you never rule here again." Jon squeezed her hand. "It's yours now. You've made it stronger than I ever could." She smiled, proud and sad. "That's why it will last." Returning south, Jon stopped at every town, riding alone with Ghost, speaking to farmers, stewards, hedge knights, septons. He heard talk of a new harvest festival, of songs for the queen's daughter, and prayers for the king's health. In Maidenpool, he put down a quarrel between rival guilds. In Duskendale, he mediated a marriage between old enemies. He returned to King's Landing with spring in full bloom. Daenerys and Rhaella met him on the city's wall, banners snapping above, dragons roaring their greeting. The city welcomed him not with fear or curiosity, but with joy. Daenerys embraced him in the courtyard, her lips brushing his ear. "You've been gone too long." He held her close. "I had to see for myself what we've built." "And what did you see?" she asked, smiling. Jon looked at the city, at their daughter, at the dragons wheeling in the sky. He felt the sun on his face, the wind in his hair, the promise of another day. "I saw hope. I saw the world changing." Daenerys rested her head on his chest. "Then let's change it together. Every day." "Bam?" Jon nodded, content at last to let the past be past, to trust that whatever storms might come, they would face them as they always had. Together, wolf and dragon, hand in hand, beneath a sky no longer ruled by death, but by the promise of a brighter spring. Okay. In the years that followed Jon's northern journey, the world seemed to bloom anew around him, even as memory pressed close, and the weight of his duty never faded. The realm had changed in ways that felt both profound and fragile. Old boundaries faded, yet the ancient powers of kin and blood, pride and vengeance, still wound beneath the new peace like roots hidden beneath fresh grass. King's Landing became a city of seasons rather than sieges. Rhaella grew with the city, turning from girl to young woman, her face a clear mirror of her parents. Daenerys' silver hair, Jon's solemn eyes. She was at ease in the gardens, racing with Ghost's white-furred grandchildren, her laughter drawing glances from guards and small folk alike. She rode dragons as other girls rode ponies, studied maps with Maester Sam, and sparred with Arya on the rare days her aunt sailed home from distant shores. Under the banners of wolf and dragon, the city's children grew up dreaming not of war but of flight, not of terror but of wonder. Jon found himself restless with age, a restlessness made sharper by the quiet he'd long craved. He spent days riding the streets with Rhaella, listening to the questions that only children dared ask. Why do the bells ring at sunset? Why can't girls be knights? Why did you never want a crown? He answered her with honesty, even when the truth was hard. He knew she listened. He saw it in the furrow of her brow, the steel that sometimes flashed in her smile. His nights were often spent on the ramparts, or walking the city's winding lanes, alone save for Ghost Descendant and the hush of old ghosts. Sometimes he'd find Daenerys in the old solar, papers scattered across the table, her fingers ink-stained as she wrote new laws, her eyes shining with a quiet fire. He marveled at her resolve. The city did too. It was a different rule. one built not on fear, but on the slow accumulation of justice and the hard-earned trust of the people. Still, not all wounds healed. In the Reach, a minor rebellion flickered, stoked by the ambitions of a Tarly cousin and the memory of lords who resented loss. Dennery sent messengers, then grain, then, when talk turned to steel, John himself, at the head of a host from the Crown lands, with Rhaegal winging overhead. John met the rebels in parley. He listened as a young knight railed against foreign queens and northern dogs. And when the last of the words dried up, John offered pardon to all who would kneel and safe passage to those who would not. It ended not in fire but in feast. The rebels bent the knee, and John saw to it that they ate and drank and watched Rhaegal circle above, a promise and a warning. A few ringleaders took the black, bound for the wall that was now a home for the realms lost, not its unwanted. The rest returned to their fields, chastened, but grateful. When John returned, Daenerys met him on the steps of the keep. "You have a gift for peace?" she told him, "though you carry it like a sword." He shrugged, uncomfortable with praise. She touched his face. "You know what the bards call you now?" He shook his head. "Tell me." She smiled. "John the Just." He laughed at that, but she kissed him until the laughter faded into a silence filled with shared memory and longing. Each season brought new challenges. In summer, a drought threatened the Stormlands, and ships from Dorne brought water and wine to the thirsty coast. In autumn, bandits from the east tried to seize the gold trains bound for the city, and Arya's letters from Braavos warned of new plots, hidden daggers in merchant hands. Winter brought a mild cold and the memory of the long night, but the walls held, the fields endured, and the dragon's fire warmed both city and spirit. It was in spring, during the festival of first planting, that Daenerys called for the first great tourney since peace was won. Lords and ladies came from every corner of the realm. Sansa from Winterfell, Gendry from Storm's End, Arianne Martell with a train of silken singers from Sunspear, Yara Greyjoy with captains who swaggered but did not provoke. The small folk filled the fields outside the city, banners flying, laughter and song mingling with the distant roar of dragons. Rhaella rode at the front of the procession, golden and unafraid, her cloak sewn with silver wolves and crimson dragons. She watched every joust, cheered every victor, and made friends with daughters of every great house. When she crowned the champion, a shy knight from the Reach who'd never seen a dragon up close before, she told him, "You fight like a brother." The words became a toast, then a song, echoing through taverns and halls as the moon rose. That night, the city's towers were lit with lanterns. The ships in the harbor glittered with torchlight, and from the ramparts, Jon and Daenerys looked out across a realm that was, for the first time in memory, truly united. "They'll write songs about this," Daenerys whispered. Jon shook his head. "Songs never tell the truth." She smiled, pressing her face to his shoulder. "But sometimes they make the truth easier to bear." He kissed her hair. "Then let them sing." Peace was not passive. Daenerys and Jon worked harder than any ruler Jon had known. They traveled the roads, held council in every major holdfast, heard grievances in every market square. Sansa advised from the north, wise and firm, sometimes sending delegations of young wildlings and Northmen to serve in King's Landing. Arya sailed beyond the maps, her letters filled with warnings and marvels in equal measure. Gendry forged alliances with trade and marriage, his house rising strong again on the Blackwater. Rhaella trained at sword and bow, but more often she was seen with books or in the company of Samwell and Missandei, learning law and languages, medicine and maps. She befriended children from every house, Stark and Martell, Baratheon and Tyrell, even a quiet bastard boy from the Westerlands who dreamed of dragons. She grew up fearless, quick to laugh, but stubborn as the snows that still fell in the north. Jon watched her, proud and afraid in equal measure, and knew that the realm's future was being written not by old men or ancient banners, but by children born after the wars were ended. Threats lingered at the edges of peace. as they always do. One autumn, whispers reached the city of a priest in Old Town who claimed to speak with the dead. Another winter, iron-born pirates raided a Dornish fishing fleet, and Yara sent swift justice. Her own, without waiting for the queen's word. Once, a stranger arrived from beyond the shadow, bringing a pale egg the size of a child's head, and asked for audience with the Dragon Queen. Daenerys listened, asked her questions, and sent the stranger away with a gift of gold and a warning. Jon met each new challenge with patience and care. He dispatched envoys, sent dragons as needed, but never as conquerors. Each threat was answered not with war, but with wisdom. And each time peace was restored, the realm's trust in their rule deepened. Time moved. Rhaella became a woman grown, her beauty the talk of 100 courts, her wit as sharp as Arya's dagger. Suitors arrived from every corner of the known world. Dothraki horselords, Braavosi princes, even the son of a distant summer king. Rhaella listened to them all, laughed at their boasts, and chose none. One evening, she stood on the balcony with her father, the city glowing with torchlight below, Rhaegal gliding high above. "Why do you never urge me to wed?" she asked. Jon considered. "Because your heart is your own. The realm will follow if you choose well. And if you choose not at all, the realm will endure. It's the peace we made that matters, not the name of the next king or queen." "Benander," she smiled, eyes shining with understanding. "Mother says I have your stubbornness." Jon laughed, brushing a silver strand from her face. "She's not wrong." Below, Daenerys watched them both, her face serene, her heart at peace. She ruled with Jon, loved with him, built with him, and in the end, as the years unfurled, she knew they had done what they set out to do. As the sun set over the Blackwater on Jon's 50th name day, a feast was held in the Red Keep's gardens. All the realm's lords and ladies came. Old friends and enemies toasted to a peace that had lasted longer than war. Songs were sung, songs of wolves and dragons, of a king who did not want a crown and a queen who earned her people's love, of a world reborn from ash and ice. When the revelry faded, Jon slipped away to the Godswood, Ghost's last cub padding at his side. The heart tree had grown tall, its red leaves whispering secrets in the warm night air. Jon knelt at the roots, closing his eyes. He felt the weight of his years, the sorrow and the hope, the distant thunder of dragon wings overhead. "I kept my promise," he whispered. "The realm is safe. The world is new." He felt then a sense of peace so deep it ached. A promise fulfilled, a burden shared. When he stood, he saw Daenerys waiting for him at the garden's edge, her hair caught in the moonlight, her eyes bright with memory and love. Together, they returned to the hall, ready for whatever dawn would bring, knowing that the world they had forged would outlast them, written in the laughter of their daughter, the stories of their people, and the shadow of dragons wheeling beneath the stars. Okay. When summer ripened over Westeros, the kingdom seemed to exhale, fields rolling gold and green from Old Town to the mountain valleys of the Vale. The long peace between wolf and dragon was no longer a matter of debate or rumor. It had become fact, a slow and deliberate working of trust across the scars of the realm. At King's Landing, where the Blackwater flowed clear again and new ships from the Summer Islands docked every week, the city buzzed with a life that few remembered and fewer believed could ever return. In the heart of the Red Keep, Jon awoke before dawn. Habit never broken, years etched now in silver threads at his temples, and a subtle heaviness in his step. He dressed without fanfare and padded quietly to the nursery, where Rhaella, grown nearly to womanhood but still content to sleep in a tangle of limbs and wolf pelts, breathed softly in the half-light. Ghost's last white cub curled at her feet, ears twitching as Jon knelt and brushed hair from his daughter's brow. He lingered, listening to her dreams as if he might glean from them the shape of the realm's future, and felt, for perhaps the 100th time, a fierce gratitude that the years since the wars had not stolen this peace. The world, he knew, could turn on a word or a sword's edge, but for now, he was simply a father, the hush of the morning his only kingdom. Later, he met Daenerys in the gardens. She wore blue today, her hair braided with spring flowers by Missandei's deft hands, her smile radiant as she watched the city awake. "She'll leave us soon," Daenerys said as Jon joined her, their eyes following Rhaella's slow walk down the paths, a book clutched to her chest. "She'll come back," Jon replied, quietly certain. "And we'll still have dragons and each other." They moved through the garden together, passing beds of mint and lavender, nodding to workers and guards, pausing to greet children playing beneath the olive trees. Overhead, Rhaegal soared with lazy strength, the sun gleaming on scales that seemed lit from within. Viserion circled farther off, a white arc against the dawn, wild birds rising in his wake. By midday, the council chamber was crowded. Gendry arrived from Storm's End, barrel-chested and sun-browned, his laughter booming across the tiles. Sansa's envoy brought word of a bountiful summer in the north, and new laws to protect wildling settlements on the new gift. Yara's messenger, a sharp-tongued woman with salt in her hair, delivered gifts from the Iron Islands, cured fish, salt pearls, and a promise that the longships would remain vigilant against pirates and slavers. Arianne Martell herself wrote, promising her next visit before the first frost, and teasing Rhaella in her postscript for still refusing every marriage proposal sent her way. "Let her be," Sansa's letter advised. "She's got the stubbornness of Starks and Targaryens both, and she'll make her own choice in her own time." Jon and Daenerys took counsel with Tyrion, Grey Worm, Samwell, and a growing number of younger voices, merchants, freeborn men and women, even the children of former enemies. They discussed repairs to the harbor walls, a new market district, and how best to spend the surplus grain that now filled city stores. When a dispute rose between northern furriers and southern clothiers, Daenerys sent for both guilds, listened to each side, and found a compromise that had them shaking hands by sundown. After the council, Jon wandered the city. He found Arya in the training yard back from the east, sparring with Rhaella, their laughter sharp and bright as swordplay itself. He watched as Arya fainted, Rhaella caught her wrist, and Arya let herself be bested with a dramatic sigh. "She learns fast," Arya called, winking at Jon. "Faster than you ever did." "She's had the best teachers," Jon replied, and Rhaella blushed, pride and mischief in her smile. Arya pulled Jon aside as Rhaella ran to wash. "There are whispers in the stepstones," Arya said, voice low. "New Sellswords gathering, talking of a king across the sea." "I'll go if you like," Jon nodded. "Be careful. Send word if you need steel or a dragon." Arya grinned. "I need nothing but my wits, brother, but I'll write." Jon clasped her arm, a silent promise between them, then watched as she melted into the shadows, always more wolf than lady. That summer, Daenerys ordered the opening of the Grand Library of King's Landing. Samwell presided over the dedication, weeping tears of joy as scrolls and books from Old Town Bravos, even Volantis, filled the shelves. Maesters and novices flocked to the city. Rhaella spent long days in the library, copying old maps and reading histories aloud to the orphans Daenerys had gathered into the palace school. It was a season of building. New bridges spanned the Blackwater. Healers from Lys and Volantis joined the city's infirmaries, teaching new arts. The bells of the Sept rang for weddings between houses once at war, and Jon found himself attending more feasts than battles. Sitting beside Daenerys beneath banners, stitched with both direwolf and dragon. Yet no peace endures without challenge. In late summer, word reached the court that a handful of disaffected lords in the Westerlands had begun gathering in the old gold mines, claiming a lost Lannister bastard as their Lion King. They raided a tax caravan, killing 3 gold cloaks. The council debated, Tyrion urging swift action, Samwell counseling patience, Gendry offering his own knights for a swift march. Jon rode out with a small company, leaving Daenerys and Rhaella to hold court. He took no dragons. He meant to show the realm that peace was not just fire and shadow. At the edge of the crumbling mines, he found the rebels, ragged, desperate, clutching at banners more hope than power. Jon offered terms. Surrender, and all would be pardoned. Resist, and they'd face the Queen's justice. The Lannister bastard was no more than a frightened boy. His court, a handful of embittered knights and miners. Jon listened to their grievances, promising reforms and better wages, and when the boy surrendered, Jon placed a hand on his shoulder. Your name is yours, not your fate. If you wish to serve, serve in truth. There is work to be done in the city. The rebels laid down arms. Jon rode back with them, their banners furled, the streets of King's Landing welcoming them as citizens, not conquerors. That autumn, Rhaella received a letter from Sunspear, a formal request for her hand from Arianna's nephew, a clever boy of 17 who had corresponded with her for years. Jon watched her read and reread the letter. Smile and sigh and frown by turns. When she came to him that evening, he was walking the walls, the wind rising over the city's lanterns. "Do you want me to accept?" she asked quietly. Jon paused. "I want you to be happy. The realm is strong. It will follow your heart, as it did your mother's, and, some would say, as it did mine." She nodded, her face open and thoughtful. "I don't know yet what I want, but I want to choose." He brushed her cheek, as he had when she was a child. "Then choose when you're ready. No one will force your hand. Not in this house, not in this city." Rhaella smiled. "Mother said you'd say that." He smiled back. "Your mother's wiser than most kings who ever lived." As winter approached, Jon spent more time in the Godswood. The heart tree grown tall now, red leaves bright even under gray sky. Ghosts' line still ran wild through the kennels. He watched their play, remembering all the nights he'd spent alone on the wall, dreaming of a home he never thought to find. Sometimes, Daenerys joined him there. They spoke of the years behind, the friends lost. Brian and Davos now buried with honor. Tyrion retired in peace at Casterly Rock. Arya still wandering. Sansa's letters, warm and wry, told of the North's prosperity and the wildlings' thriving villages. Gendry's son wrote to Rhaella, asking after the dragons and the city's new bells. Jon looked up one afternoon to see Rhaegal and Viserion circling, wings bright against the clouds. Rhaella stood beside him, grown tall, the realm's future in her eyes. "Are you afraid?" she asked. Jon shook his head. "Not anymore. Not for you, not for this realm." He rested his hand on hers, feeling the steady pulse of her life. Hope, resilience, promise. The city was at peace. The world had changed. And Jon, at last, felt the story closing, not as an ending, but as a promise. The realm would endure, for as long as there were children beneath the dragon's wings, and a family that remembered what it meant to fight for the living. He smiled, watching the sun set over the Blackwater, Daenerys at his side, Rhaella before him, and the sky wide and bright and free.